A cleaning lady named Loretta Greene found a diamond ring under a desk on the 42nd floor at 2 o'clock in the morning. And it was worth more money than she would earn in 10 years of scrubbing other people's floors. She had been served an eviction notice 4 days earlier. She was raising her 10-year-old grandson alone on 2 paychecks that did not quite add up to one life. That ring could have changed everything. And she turned it in to the lost and found before her shift was even over. And she did not tell a soul. And she did not take a single dollar, because her mother had taught her a long time ago that what isn't yours isn't yours, no matter how bad you need it. What Loretta did not know was that the ring belonged to the billionaire whose tower she cleaned, that it had belonged to his late wife, that it was the only piece of her he had left in this world, and that he had assumed, the way men with everything assume about people with nothing, that whoever found a ring like that was already long gone with it. What she really did not know was that he had watched her turn it in on a security monitor at 3 o'clock that morning, a powerful man sitting alone in a dark room weeping over the honesty of a woman he had never met and could not explain. And the next night, he did a thing that none of the people who worked for him could understand. He followed her bus home. What waited at the end of that bus line is the reason this story exists. Stay with me all the way to the end, because how a returned ring and a long bus ride changed 2 lives is going to stay with you. And before we begin, do me one kindness and tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. That always means more than you know. The cleaning crew came in at 11. When the office workers had gone home and the great glass tower of the Hayes Development Group on Wacker Drive stood mostly dark and entirely silent. 53 floors of empty desks and humming machines, and the particular loneliness of a building built for 1,000 people, and occupied, at midnight, by 6 women with carts. Loretta Greene had cleaned that tower for 9 years. She knew it the way you know a thing you tend at night while the world that uses it sleeps. She knew which executives kept their offices like showrooms and which kept them like disaster areas. Which ones left thank you notes for the cleaning staff at the holidays, and which ones had never in 9 years registered that the carpet did not vacuum itself. She knew the building's moods, the hum of it, the way the city lights looked from the 42nd floor at 2 in the morning. A thing the people who worked there in daylight, on the phone, in meetings, never once stopped to see. Loretta saw it every night. It was, she sometimes thought, the one luxury her job afforded her. That view, that silence, that the most expensive real estate in the city belonged, for a few hours every night, to the women who cleaned it. She was working the 42nd floor that night, the executive floor. And she was tired in the specific way of a woman who had worked a second job that day before coming to her first one. Because that was the arithmetic of Loretta's life. 2 jobs to make the one life almost work. She vacuumed the long carpeted hall and the conference rooms. And then she came to the corner office, the big one, the one that belonged, though she had never met him and would not have recognized him, to the man whose name was on the building. It was usually locked. Tonight it was not. And as she ran the vacuum along the base of the great desk, something caught the light. Down in the deep pile of the carpet against the desk leg, a small, hard glint. And Loretta Greene bent down, her knees protesting, and picked it up, and held it up to the city light coming through the great window. And her breath stopped. It was a ring. A diamond ring, a real one. She knew real from the costume jewelry her own mother had worn because she had learned the difference the hard way. And this was real. The center stone, bigger than any she had seen outside a store window, set in a band that even her untrained eye could tell was old and fine and worth a fortune. It lay in her gloved palm, and it threw little fractures of light around the dark office. And Loretta Greene stood very still on the 42nd floor at 2 in the morning, and understood completely and immediately, that she was holding more money than she would ever otherwise touch in her life. I want you to understand exactly what that ring meant to the woman holding it, because the whole of this story lives in that 1 minute. 4 days earlier, a man had taped a notice to Loretta's door. The rent on the small 2-bedroom apartment she shared with her grandson had gone up again, the 3rd time in 2 years. And Loretta, who paid her bills the way some people pray, faithfully and a little desperately, had fallen behind, and the notice gave her 30 days. She had a grandson asleep in the 2nd bedroom of that apartment, Isaiah, 10 years old, who she was raising alone because the world had taken his mother, her daughter, 2 years before, and who needed, more than anything, exactly one thing from his grandmother, which was that his world stay steady, that the one adult he had left not be taken from him too, and not the roof over his head. And here, in Loretta's gloved hand, glittering, was the answer to all of it. A ring like this, sold quietly, would pay the back rent in the next 2 years of it. It would put Isaiah's world on solid ground. No one had seen her pick it up. No one would ever know. The office was unlocked. The ring was on the floor. Finders keepers, the universe handing a drowning woman a rope. Loretta Greene held that rope in her hand for about a minute. And then she did the only thing she had ever been able to do. The thing that had been built into her so deep and so young that it did not feel like a choice. It felt like gravity. She heard her mother's voice. Her mother had cleaned houses too on the North Shore for 40 years and had raised Loretta in 2 rooms on almost nothing. And had said to her, more times than Loretta could count, usually while folding other people's laundry, "What isn't yours, baby, no matter how bad you need it. And the day you forget, that is the day you can't look at yourself in the mirror anymore. And a person who can't look at herself doesn't have anything. I don't care how much money's in her pocket." Loretta had buried her mother 11 years ago, and she could still hear her say it. And standing on the 42nd floor with a fortune in her gloved hand and an eviction notice on her door, Loretta Greene did not wrestle with it nearly as long as you might think, because there was, in the end, nothing to wrestle. She closed her hand around the ring, and she finished her floor, because the floor still needed finishing. And at the end of her shift, in the gray before dawn, she carried it down to the lobby, and she filled out a lost and found report in her careful handwriting, and she handed the ring to the night security officer and asked him to make sure it got to whoever had lost it. Because somebody, she said, is going to be just sick about losing this. And then she signed the log, and she clocked out, and she walked into the cold to catch her bus, and she did not tell a single living soul, because to Loretta Greene, she had not done anything worth telling. She had simply returned a thing that was not hers. Her mother had not raised her to be congratulated for that. Her mother had raised her to do it and keep walking. She caught the first bus in the gray cold and rode it home the way she rode it every morning. And if you had been on that bus, you would not have seen anything at all. Just a tired woman in a cleaning smock, with her head against the window. And you would never have guessed that she had just held and given back more money than you would see in a decade. That was the thing about it. There was no one to tell and nothing to show and no reward coming. And Loretta Greene rode home in the ordinary anonymous dark of her ordinary anonymous life and let herself feel, just once, privately, the full size of what she had handed back. Because she was not a saint, whatever the security camera made her look like later, she was a frightened woman with an eviction notice on her door. And for the length of that ride, she let herself imagine the other life, the one where she had slipped the ring into her sock and said nothing, the back rent paid, Isaiah's room safe, the fear simply gone. She imagined it in detail, because she was honest enough not to pretend the temptation had been small. It had been enormous. And then she got off at her stop and bought the bread and the milk and the boys' cereal, with the careful change from her worn wallet. And she climbed the stairs to the apartment she might soon lose. And she looked in on her sleeping grandson. And she knew, looking at him, that she had done the only thing she could have done. The back rent was a number, and there would always be another number. But the way that boy looked at her, the way he trusted that his grandmother was a person who did right, that was not a number, and she would not have traded it for every diamond in the city. She had given the ring back so that she could keep being the woman her grandson believed she was. That was worth more than the ring. She knew it, and she went to bed. If a story about a woman who gave back a fortune she desperately needed, and asked for nothing, and told no one, is the reason you're here tonight, then make sure you're subscribed. Because what that one honest minute set in motion is the entire reason this story exists. To understand the size of what Loretta did, you have to understand the life she did it from, the life that ring would have rescued. Loretta Greene was 52 years old, and she had worked hard every day of it. She had raised one daughter, Crystal, mostly alone, and she had done everything a mother could do. And for a while, it had looked like it took. Crystal grew up bright and funny, and had a baby of her own, Isaiah, and named Loretta the godmother and the grandmother and the whole world. And then Crystal had gotten sick, an illness that moved faster than anyone believed it could. And within a year, she was gone, 30 years old. And Loretta, who had already raised one child through hard times, found herself at 50 starting completely over, raising a grieving 8-year-old because there was no one else, and because she would have walked through fire before she let her grandson go into the system, the same way every good person in these stories refuses, at the very bottom, to let go of the child. Raising Isaiah on a cleaner's wages was not a thing the math supported. So Loretta did what people like her do, which is make the math work through sheer stubbornness and the spending of their own bodies. She took a day job too, a few hours at a laundromat, and she slept in pieces. And she went without, quietly, the way mothers and grandmothers go without. The smaller portion, the older coat, the doctor's visit put off, and she poured what was left, which was most of her, into the boy. Because Isaiah was worth it. Isaiah was extraordinary. A serious, bright child who had taught himself chess from a library book, who read the way other children breathe, and who Loretta believed, with the fierce certainty of a grandmother, was going to be somebody, was going to have a life she and Crystal had only been able to dream about. If she could just keep the ground steady under his feet long enough for him to grow. Crystal had been the joy and the worry of Loretta's life in equal measure. The way an only child of a single mother often is. She had grown up bright and quick and a little wild. And she had given Loretta some hard years in her teens, then come through them into a young woman finding her feet, a young mother herself, fierce about her son, calling Loretta 3 times a day with questions about fevers and feedings, the two of them raising the boy half together. And for a few years, there it had been good, so good. The best years, Loretta would think later, of her whole life. Her daughter grown and close and a baby in the house again. And then Crystal had started getting tired and then getting sick, and the doctors took too long to find it and then found it everywhere. And the thing moved through her with a speed that left no room for anything but the fighting of it. Loretta had nursed her own daughter through it, had held her hand through the treatments and the hope and the failing of the hope, and had promised her, near the end, the only promise that mattered, that Isaiah would be loved, that Isaiah would be kept, that Isaiah would never for one day wonder if somebody had him. Crystal had died at 30 with her mother's hand in hers, and her son's crayon drawing taped to the hospital wall. And Loretta Greene, who had already raised one child alone, had wiped her face and squared her shoulders and started over at 50. Because that is what the promise meant. And because there was a grieving 8-year-old who had just lost his whole world and needed his grandmother to be steady. So she was steady. She grieved on the bus. She grieved at the sink with the water running. She did not grieve in front of the boy, because the boy needed the ground to hold, and Loretta Greene had decided that she was going to be the ground, no matter what it cost her, for as long as she drew breath. 2 jobs. Going without. A life spent entirely on other people, and not 1 ounce of self-pity about it. Because to Loretta it was not sacrifice. It was just love doing what love does, which is to show up and keep showing up, and never once count the cost out loud. Here is something most people never think about, because the whole design of it is that you never think about it. The offices you work in, the buildings you pass, the towers full of important daytime people, are cleaned at night by an army of workers you will almost never see, most of them women, many of them immigrants and women of color, who come in when you leave and are gone before you return, who keep the entire machinery of corporate life functioning and are paid little and seen less. They are, by design, invisible. The executive whose office Loretta cleaned for 9 years had never once learned her name. And that invisibility is not an accident. It is a kind of architecture, built so that the people at the top of the tower never have to think about the hands that keep it clean. Never have to picture those hands going home on a night bus to an apartment with an eviction notice on the door. Loretta Greene had spent 9 years being invisible to the man whose name was on the building. It would take a diamond ring on a dark carpet to make him finally see her. And when he did, it would undo him completely. Nathaniel Hayes was 62 years old, and by every measure the world uses, he had won. He had built the Hayes Development Group from a single rehabbed building on the South Side into one of the largest development firms in the country. And he had a tower with his name on it and more money than 3 lifetimes could spend. And he was, on the night Loretta found the ring, one of the loneliest men in the city of Chicago. Because 3 years earlier, the only person who had ever made the money mean anything, his wife Margaret, the girl he had married when they had nothing, who had believed in him before there was a single reason to, who had kept him human through 40 years of becoming powerful, had died of cancer in the spring. And Nathaniel Hayes had discovered, in the silence she left behind, the thing that no amount of success had prepared him for, which was that he had spent his whole life building a kingdom for an audience of 1, and the 1 was gone, and the kingdom was just buildings. He had one thing of hers that mattered more than all the rest: her engagement ring. He had not been able to afford much when he proposed, a younger man with big plans and empty pockets, and the ring he had given Maggie then had been small and humble, and she had loved it and worn it for years. But on their 30th anniversary, when he finally could, he had given her the ring he had always wished he could afford that first time, a magnificent thing. And Maggie had laughed and cried and said the first one suited her better. But she'd wear his showing off for him, and she had worn that ring every day until the end. And after she died, Nathaniel kept it in the safe in his office. And on certain nights, her birthday, their anniversary, the anniversary of the day he lost her, he would take it out and hold it, and sit alone in his dark office on the 42nd floor with the city spread out below, and remember when the 2 of them had nothing but each other, and it had been enough. More than enough, the richest he would ever be. They had started with nothing, he and Maggie, which was the part the business magazines always left out because it did not fit the photographs of the tower. Nathaniel Hayes had been a kid from the South Side with more nerve than sense, fixing up a single rundown building with borrowed money and his own 2 hands. And Maggie had married him when all he owned was that building and a head full of plans any reasonable person would have called delusions. She had not been reasonable. She had believed him before there was a single reason to. And more than that, she had believed in him, which is a different and rarer thing. And on the nights when the money did not come and the bank called and the whole delusion threatened to fold, it had been Maggie who sat with him at the kitchen table in their one cramped apartment and told him to try again tomorrow. That she had not married a building. She had married a man. And the man was going to be fine. He had given her a ring he could barely afford in those days, a small thing, a chip of a diamond in a thin band. And she had worn it like it was the crown jewels. On their 30th anniversary, when the tower was built and the money was beyond counting, Nathaniel had finally given her the ring he had dreamed of giving her that first time, the magnificent one, the one Loretta would find on a dark carpet. And Maggie had laughed and cried and turned it in the light and then said the thing he would remember the rest of his life. "It's beautiful, Nathaniel," she said, "and you didn't need to, because the little one already said everything this one's trying to." She kept both. She wore the big one to please him and the little one underneath it to remember. And when she died, he buried her wearing the small first ring, because that was the one that was really them. And he kept the magnificent one in the safe. The proof of how far the boy from the South Side had carried the promise he made the only person who ever believed in him before he was anything at all. That was the ring. That was what a cleaning lady he had never met found on his floor at 2 a.m. and carried straight down to the lost and found, and gave back. The night Loretta found the ring was the anniversary of the day Maggie died. Nathaniel had taken the ring from the safe and held it for an hour in the dark. And then his phone had rung, some crisis, some deal, the machinery of the kingdom demanding its king, and he had set the ring down on the desk, distracted, and taken the call, and paced. And somewhere in the pacing, the ring had been knocked to the carpet. And when he finally hung up and gathered himself to leave, grief fogged and exhausted, he had locked the safe out of habit, forgetting it was empty, and gone home. He did not discover the ring was missing until the next morning. And when he did, the bottom fell out of his world a second time. He tore the office apart. He had the safe checked, the cameras pulled, his assistant in tears, security mobilized, and underneath the frantic searching was a grief so total it frightened the people around him, because they understood, watching him, that this was not about a piece of jewelry, that their formidable, unbreakable employer was coming apart over the loss of the last physical piece of his wife, and that, if it was truly gone, something in him might go with it. And here is the thing that tells you everything about the distance between Nathaniel Hayes's world and Loretta Greene's. When the head of security gently raised the possibility that the ring had been found by the overnight cleaning staff, Nathaniel Hayes felt his heart sink, because in his experience of the world, in the world he had built and lived in for 40 years, a ring like that, found by a person who cleaned offices for a living, was a ring that was gone, sold, pawned, vanished into the economy of people who needed money, which was, he had long ago stopped noticing, almost everyone who was not him. He did not think this with contempt. He thought it as simple realism, the hard-won realism of a man who had clawed his way up and believed he understood how the world worked and what desperate people did with sudden fortune. He had already, in his heart, said goodbye to the last piece of Maggie, And then his head of security said, "Actually, sir, you should see this," and turned the monitor toward him. This is the moment everything turns, and I promise you it is worth it. So if you are not subscribed yet, do it now. Because what Nathaniel Hayes saw on that screen and what he did about it is the whole reason I wanted to tell you this story. The footage was from the lobby camera, time-stamped just before dawn, and Nathaniel Hayes watched a tired woman in a gray cleaning smock walk up to the night security desk, take a small object from her pocket, and hand it across, and stand there, filling out a form in careful handwriting, and point upstairs, explaining something, her face open and earnest, and then sign the log and walk out into the dark. The security officer confirmed it. The ring was already in the lost and found, logged at 5:42 a.m. by a member of the cleaning staff. It had never been gone at all. A woman who cleaned his offices had found a fortune on his floor and carried it straight to the desk and given it back, and signed her name to it, and left hours ago without waiting for a reward, without telling anyone upstairs, without, as far as anyone could tell, considering for one moment that she might simply keep it. Nathaniel Hayes sat in his dark office and watched that footage 4 times, and the formidable, hollowed-out, grieving man who believed he understood exactly how the world worked began, quietly, to weep, because the world had just done something his realism had no room for. A woman he had never noticed, one of the invisible women who cleaned his kingdom at night, had been handed the last piece of his wife and the answer to whatever her own troubles were in the same instant, and had chosen, alone, with no one watching, or so she believed, to give it back. Nathaniel Hayes had spent 3 years certain that the goodness had gone out of his life when Maggie did. And here was a stranger on a security monitor at 3 in the morning, reminding him that it had not gone out of the world. He sat in that dark office until the city began to gray, and for the first time in 3 years, he did not feel the particular weight that had been sitting on his chest since Maggie died. The weight of a man going through the motions of a life he no longer believed in. Something had shifted, and he could not have told you what. Only that a stranger on a security monitor had reached into the place where his grief lived and turned a light on. His assistant found him there at 6 in the morning, alarmed, because Nathaniel Hayes did not sleep in his office, and he waved her off and asked her, instead of the day's agenda, to pull a personnel file. And when she brought it, he read it the way a man reads a letter from someone he has lost, slowly, twice. There was almost nothing in it. A name, a start date 9 years gone, an address on the far south side, a wage that when he looked at it, when he really looked at the number his own company paid a woman who had just handed back a fortune, made him set the file down and sit very still, because he had built that pay scale, or signed off on the people who built it. And he had never once in his life had to think about whether a number like that was enough to live on. He was thinking about it now, hard. When he told his assistant, and later Sully, what he intended to do, neither of them quite believed him. And Sully said plainly, "The way only a man who has driven you for 15 years can... You sure about this, Mr. Hayes? You don't even know her." And Nathaniel Hayes said, "That's exactly the problem, Sully. I've spent 9 years not knowing her. I'd like to fix that." He had to know who she was. Not to reward her, not at first. It was past that. It was something more confused and more urgent than gratitude. He had spent 3 years among people who wanted things from him, who were kind to his face and calculated behind it, who saw in him only what he could give them. And he had forgotten. He had genuinely forgotten that there were people in the world who would do the right thing when no one was looking and nobody would ever know. He needed to see one. He needed to understand her. He pulled her file, what little there was, a name. Loretta Greene, 9 years of service, an address on the far south side. And he learned that she had clocked out at the end of her shift and would not be back until 11 that night. And Nathaniel Hayes, a man who had not done a spontaneous or unplanned thing in 20 years, made a decision that his driver, when he heard it, was sure meant the old man had finally cracked. He was going to find her. That night, when the cleaning crew left at dawn, he was going to be there, and he was going to follow her, and he was going to see, with his own eyes, the life that a woman lived who could give back a fortune she so plainly needed. He told himself it was so he could thank her properly. The truth, underneath, was simpler and stranger. A part of Nathaniel Hayes that had been dead for 3 years had felt something move on that security monitor, and he was following it the way you follow the only light in a dark house. So the next morning, in the gray cold before dawn, a sleek black town car idled across the street from the service entrance of the Hayes Tower. And inside it sat a billionaire and his bewildered driver, Sully, watching the night cleaning crew come out in their gray smocks, exhausted, scattering toward trains and buses. And Nathaniel Hayes pointed and said, "That one." And Sully said, "Mr. Hayes, with respect, what exactly are we doing?" And Nathaniel said, "I have no idea, Sully. Just follow her." And Sully, who had driven the man for 15 years and had never once heard him admit to not knowing what he was doing, put the car in gear, and they followed a tired woman in a gray smock to a bus stop. And when the bus came and she got on, they followed the bus. If your chest is tight right now, that's the story working. And this is the moment to subscribe. Because what a billionaire learned riding behind a city bus to the end of the line is the heart of everything I'm trying to say tonight. It was a long ride. That was the first thing that struck Nathaniel Hayes, sitting in the warm leather of his car behind a city bus that stopped every 2 blocks. How long it was. How far the woman who cleaned his 40th floor had to travel to reach the place she lived. The bus crawled south and west, out of the bright canyon of the Loop, past the river. And as it went, the city changed around it the way the city does. The glass towers giving way to older buildings and then to neighborhoods. The storefronts changing, the streets growing harder and then quieter. The distance between Loretta Greene's work and Loretta Greene's home revealing itself to be not just miles, but worlds. Nathaniel watched her through the bus's lit windows when he could. A tired woman with her head tipped against the glass, and he watched the neighborhoods she traveled through. Neighborhoods he developed around, but had not actually set foot in for decades. Neighborhoods that were, he understood with a slowly dawning shame, the kind of place he had come from himself, before the tower, before the money, before he forgot. The bus reached the end of its useful run for her, and she got off. And Nathaniel had Sully stop, and he did a thing then that no one who knew him would have believed. He got out of the car. He told Sully to wait, and he, Nathaniel Hayes, in his $1,000 overcoat, got out and followed a cleaning lady on foot down a south side street in the cold dawn, at a distance, just to see. He watched her stop at a corner store and count change carefully from a worn wallet for a few things: a loaf of bread, milk, a small box of the cereal a 10-year-old likes. He watched her walk to a modest brick 3-flat and climb the stairs, slow, her whole body telling the story of a double shift, and let herself in. And Nathaniel Hayes stood on a cold corner across the street and looked up at the lit window where a tired, honest woman had just gone home. And he stayed there a long time, an old billionaire on a street corner at dawn. And he thought about a ring on a dark carpet, and a woman who gave it back, and the eviction notice he did not yet know about, but somehow already felt, and his own wife, who had loved him best when he had nothing. And he understood that he had been looking at his whole life from the wrong end of it for a very long time. What undid him on that ride was not the poverty of the place, because Nathaniel Hayes knew poverty, had come from it, could have drawn it from memory. What undid him was that he had stopped seeing it. He developed property all over this city. He knew these neighborhoods as line items, as parcels, as opportunities and risks on a map in a boardroom. He had not understood them as places where people like the woman on the bus actually lived. Rode an hour each way to clean his floors, raised children, grew old, until he was forced to ride behind her and watch the city peel back layer by layer between his tower and her door. Somewhere around the river, he caught his own reflection in the car window laid over the passing streets, an old rich man in a fine coat superimposed on the kind of block he had been born on, and the two images would not separate. His own mother had cleaned other people's homes. He had forgotten that, or rather, he had filed it away as part of the story of how far he had come, instead of as a thing that was still true right now, tonight. For a woman on a bus, for thousands of women on thousands of buses, the same work, the same invisibility, the same long ride home. He had climbed out of it and then pulled the ladder up behind him and called it success. The woman on the bus had just, without knowing it, lowered it back down. He did not go up that morning. He was not ready. And more than that, he understood, with an instinct that grief had sharpened in him, that he could not simply appear a billionaire on her doorstep and reduce what she had done to a transaction, hand her a check and turn her quiet act into a payday and rob it of the very thing that made it move him. So instead, Nathaniel Hayes did what powerful men can do. He found things out. Quietly, carefully, over the next 2 days, he learned the shape of Loretta Greene's life, and every single thing he learned drove the truth of it deeper. He learned about Crystal, the daughter she had lost. He learned about Isaiah, the grandson she was raising. He learned about the 2 jobs and the going without. And he learned, last, the thing that took the breath out of him, that on the very day she found his wife's ring and carried it down to the lost and found, Loretta Greene had been 4 days into a 30-day eviction notice. She had been holding the answer to losing her home in her gloved hand, and she had given it back and signed her name and caught her bus and told no one. Nathaniel Hayes sat with that for a long time, and then he stopped being a man following a light in a dark house and became, for the first time in 3 years, a man with something to do. Meanwhile, Loretta Greene's 30 days were running out. She had gone back to the management office and pleaded her case, and been told, politely, by a person who did not make the rules, that the back rent had to be paid in full, or the eviction would proceed, and Loretta had walked home doing the math she had done 100 times, the math that did not work. And for the first time since Crystal died, she had let herself feel, late at night when Isaiah was asleep, the cold edge of real fear, the fear of a woman who had run out of stubbornness for the first time in her life. She did not regret the ring, not for 1 second. She would have done it again, but she lay awake and wondered what was going to happen to them, and where they would go, and how she would keep Isaiah's world steady when the very floor was being pulled out from under it. And she did the thing she did when she had nowhere else to turn, which was to talk quietly to her mother, gone 11 years, and to Crystal, gone 2, and to ask them to help her find a way, because she was, for once, all out of ways herself. She had gone down to the management office twice. The first time, early, she had laid the whole thing out to a young man behind the counter. The second job, the grandson, the years she had paid on time before the increases, and asked, not for charity, just for a payment plan, just for time. And the young man had been sorry and had typed something and told her the account was past the point where he was allowed to offer a plan, that it had gone to the legal process now, that she would need to pay the balance in full to stop it. The second time, closer to the deadline, she had come with most of a plan and none of the money. And a different person had told her the same thing in the same sorry voice. And Loretta had understood that she was talking not to a person, but to a process, a machine with no face she could appeal to, that did not care that she had given back a diamond ring 4 days into the very notice it was now enforcing. Because of course it did not know that. Because she had told no one. Because that was the entire point. So in the last week of the 30 days, Loretta Greene did the things she had not done since she buried Crystal. She lay awake. She lay awake doing the math that did not work and listening to her grandson breathe in the next room and feeling, for the first time in 2 years, genuinely afraid. Not for herself. She had stopped being afraid for herself a long time ago. But for him. For the steadiness she had promised a dying woman she would give that boy. The steadiness that was about to be taped to a door. She did not regret the ring. She made herself say it out loud in the dark so she would believe it. I do not regret it. I would do it again. But she lay there all the same and wondered what was going to become of them. And she prayed, the way her mother had taught her, not for a miracle. She had stopped believing she was the kind of person miracles happened to, but just for a way, just for one door to open somewhere, because she was a woman who had always found a way, and she had, for the first time in her life, run completely out. Isaiah knew. Of course he knew. The way the children in these stories always know, because a bright, observant child misses nothing. And he had seen the notice, and he had seen his grandmother's face. And one night, he came and sat next to her and put his hand on her arm, this serious 10-year-old, and said, "Grandma, if we have to move, it's okay. I don't care where we live. I just want to live with you." And Loretta Greene, who had not let herself break in front of that boy one single time in 2 years, had to get up and go into the kitchen and run the water so he would not hear her. Because there is a particular pain in a child trying to comfort the adult who is supposed to be protecting him. In a 10-year-old saying he does not need a home as long as he has you. And it is the pain of a love that the world keeps trying to make impossible, and that refuses, anyway, to die. Isaiah was the kind of child who made you believe in the future. He was 10 years old and serious behind his glasses, and he had taught himself chess from a battered library book the year his mother died, because he had explained to Loretta with great gravity. Chess was a game where, if you thought hard enough, you could see what was coming, and Loretta had understood, with an ache, that a boy who had not been able to see his mother's death coming had gone looking for a world where nothing took you by surprise. He walked to the library every Saturday and came home with the maximum number of books they would let him take. And he read them all. And he kept a little pocket chess set in his coat and would play against himself on the bus. And the librarians knew him by name and saved things for him. And his teachers used the word gifted in the careful way teachers use it when they mean it and are worried the world will waste it. Loretta looked at that boy and saw everything, saw Crystal in his quick mind, and saw a future neither she nor her daughter had been allowed to have. And she had decided, with the whole force of her stubborn heart, that the one thing she would not allow was for that boy's gift to be decided by his grandmother's bank balance. She would clean offices until her body gave out before she let that happen. So when Isaiah came and sat beside her that night and told her, in his serious way, that he did not care where they lived as long as they lived together, it had undone her completely. Because it was the most generous thing anyone had said to her in years, and because it was exactly backward. because a child should never have to reassure the adult, because she was supposed to be the one promising him. The world had gotten it so wrong that a 10-year-old was comforting the woman breaking herself to save him. That was the night she cried at the sink. The knock came on a Saturday afternoon. Loretta opened her door to find a man she did not recognize. An older black man in a fine dark overcoat that did not belong on her street. And behind him, at a respectful distance on the landing, another man who had the look of a driver. And the man in the coat said her name, Mrs. Greene, gently like an apology, and asked if he might have a few minutes of her time, and said his name was Nathaniel Hayes. And Loretta, who did not know the name, who had cleaned the lobby with that name carved into its marble 5 nights a week for 9 years and never once connected it to a person, said, "Do I know you?" And Nathaniel Hayes said, "No, ma'am. But you found something of mine. And I have come a very long way, in more ways than one, to thank you for giving it back." She let him in, because her mother had also raised her to be polite, and she put on coffee she could not really spare. And Isaiah hovered in the doorway with a book, and Nathaniel Hayes sat in a small, clean apartment that could have fit into a corner of his office, and he told her. He told her the ring was his wife's. He told her about Maggie, and the small, humble ring he could not afford the first time, and the magnificent one he gave her on their 30th. And how she had died. And how that ring was the only piece of her he had left. And how he had lost it on the anniversary of her death. And how he had been so certain, God forgive him, so certain it was gone for good, because he had forgotten, somewhere in 40 years of becoming rich, that there were people in the world like her. And Loretta Greene listened, and her own eyes filled, because she understood grief. She was an expert in it. And she said, very softly, "I'm so glad it found its way back to you. I knew somebody was just sick about losing it. I'm so glad it was something that mattered like that, and not just money." And Nathaniel Hayes had to put his hand over his mouth, because she had just told him, without any idea what she was saying, that she was glad the ring she gave back had mattered as more than money, when the giving back of it had cost her, perhaps, her home, and she did not even mention that, did not bring it up, was simply glad for a stranger that his grief had been given back its anchor. He sat in that small kitchen and understood that he was in the presence of something he had not encountered in a very long time. A person who was simply, all the way down, good, and that all his money had never been able to buy the thing this woman gave away for free. If you have made it this far with me, here at the part that matters most, then you already know the kind of person Loretta Greene is, and you already know she is about to try to refuse what comes next. So let me ask you to stay, because how he answers her is the whole point. He told her what he wanted to do, and he was careful, so careful, because he had thought about it for 2 days, about how to do this without insulting her, without turning her grace into a transaction. He said, "Mrs. Greene, I know about the eviction." He watched her stiffen, her pride coming up, and he went on quickly, gently. "I didn't come here to embarrass you. I came here because I found out that on the same day you gave me back the only piece of my wife I have left, you were 4 days into losing your home, and you gave it back anyway, and you didn't say a word." He let that sit. "The back rent on this apartment is paid. Today, all of it, and the next 2 years, and I'd like to do better than that. I'd like to help you and your grandson into a home that's yours, that nobody can put a notice on. But I'll go at whatever pace lets you keep your dignity. Because I can see that matters to you more than the money does. And that, Mrs. Greene, is exactly why I'm sitting in your kitchen. And Loretta Greene did exactly what he knew she would do. She said no. She said, "Mr. Hayes, I appreciate it, I do, but I didn't give that ring back to get paid. I gave it back because it wasn't mine. If I take a house for it now, then I sold it after all, just slower. And I can't do that. I can't look at my mother when I see her again and tell her I sold my good name for a roof. I'll find a way. I always find a way." And she meant every word. And she would have walked back out into that 30-day notice with her chin up rather than feel like she had been paid for her conscience. But Nathaniel Hayes had buried a wife who taught him things, and he had thought about this, and he was ready. "Mrs. Greene," he said, "I'm not paying you for the ring. You can't pay somebody for the kind of thing you did. It isn't for sale, that's the whole point of it. And if I thought I was buying it, I'd be as lost as I was 3 years ago. This isn't a reward. It's the truth catching up to a wrong. For 9 years you have cleaned my building, and I never learned your name. For 9 years the people who keep my whole world running have been invisible to me, paid too little, seen not at all. And I built it that way. I built a tower a person could work in for 9 years and stay a stranger to the man whose name is on it. That's the wrong. You didn't just give me back a ring, Mrs. Greene. You gave me back my eyes. So let me make something right that I made wrong, and let me do it for the woman who did it. By name, out loud, instead of one more invisible person I never had to look at." And then he said the thing that finally reached her, because he had listened, in that kitchen, well enough to know where she actually lived. He looked at Isaiah in the doorway with his book, and he said, "And let me do it for him. You've spent 2 years keeping that boy's world steady with your own 2 hands and your own going without. Let somebody help you carry it. Not because you can't, because you shouldn't have to do it alone, and because your daughter would want her son to have the ground under him that you've been bleeding to give him. That's not charity, Mrs. Greene. That's just what your mother would call doing right. And you taught me that 4 days ago on a security camera at 3 in the morning. Loretta Greene put her face in her hands at her own kitchen table, and the stubbornness that had held for 52 years, that had survived a daughter's death and a grandchild's grief, and 1,000 nights of going without, finally, safely, gave way. And Isaiah came and stood beside her and put his arm around her. And Nathaniel Hayes, a man who 3 years ago had stopped believing his life would ever contain anything that mattered again, sat in a small South Side kitchen and felt, for the first time since Maggie died, useful, awake, alive, like a man instead of a monument. There was more, and it grew, over the months that followed, into something Nathaniel Hayes had not planned in that kitchen, but could not, once he had seen it, leave undone. He paid the back rent that very day, and within a season he had helped Loretta and Isaiah into a small, sound, sunlit house on a quiet street, in both their names, with no notice that could ever be taped to its door. He set up an education fund for Isaiah, fully funded through college and beyond, because a boy who teaches himself chess from a library book should not have his future decided by his grandmother's wages. And Isaiah, who understood more than the adults realized, asked Mr. Hayes one afternoon whether the fund could be in his mother's name, in Crystal's name. And Nathaniel Hayes, who knew something about keeping the dead close, said it could, and it was. And then Nathaniel Hayes did the thing that turned one woman's honesty into something that outlived the moment. He could not stop thinking about what Loretta had said without meaning to, that for 9 years she had been invisible. So he turned the whole grieving, restless force of himself onto the company he had built, and he changed it. He raised the wages of every cleaning and maintenance worker across every Hayes property, not by a little, by enough to matter. Enough that a woman raising a grandchild would not have to work 2 jobs to almost make one life. He created a fund, and he named it the Margaret Hayes Fund, after the wife whose ring had started all of it. And its purpose was the one thing he had learned in a South Side kitchen, to see the unseen, to provide housing help and education and emergency support to the very workers who kept his towers running and had spent decades beneath his notice. He made it policy that the cleaning staff were to be known by name, greeted, thanked, treated as what they were, the people without whom the kingdom did not function. It was not enough to undo decades of not seeing. He knew that. But it was a beginning, and it had a woman's name on it, and another woman's honesty behind it. And it kept, long after that Saturday, doing the work that grace does, which is to spread. There was a young mother, that first year, a woman who mopped the floors of a Hayes building at night and was about to lose her childcare, who got a call she did not expect and help she did not have to beg for, and never knew that the reason the call came was a cleaning lady on the 42nd floor and a ring on a dark carpet 2 winters before. That is how grace travels. It does not announce itself. It moves down the same invisible channels the suffering moves down, quietly, person to person, and the people it reaches mostly never learn the name of the honesty that started it. Loretta Greene learned their names, though. That became her work, the work she was better at than anyone Nathaniel had ever hired, because she had been every one of them. She sat in the rooms where the decisions got made. In clothes she still bought on sale because some things do not change, and she did not want them to. And when the numbers on the page threatened to turn back into line items, into parcels, into people nobody had to picture, it was Loretta who said their names out loud, who reminded a room full of comfortable people that the woman on line 7 of the spreadsheet rode a bus an hour each way and was holding her whole family up with 2 tired hands. And did anyone here happen to know her name? Usually no one did. So Loretta would tell them that was the job. Maggie Hayes would have loved it. Nathaniel said so, often. 1 year later, on a bright, cold Saturday, much like the one Nathaniel Hayes had knocked on her door, Loretta Greene stood in the kitchen of a small house that was hers, watching her grandson at the kitchen table, bent over a chessboard, teaching the game to a younger child from down the block, patient and serious, the way she had taught him to be. She did not clean offices anymore, not because she was too proud to. She would have told you cleaning was honest work, and she was never ashamed of a day of it. But because Nathaniel Hayes had asked her, after he came to know her, to come and help him run the fund that bore his wife's name, to be the eyes he had admitted he didn't have, to sit in the rooms where the decisions got made and make sure the people at the bottom of the tower stayed visible. And Loretta, who knew exactly what it was to be invisible, had said yes to that. Because that was not charity. That was a job, and an important one, and she was extraordinarily good at it. She and Nathaniel Hayes became, over that year, an unlikely and genuine pair of friends. The billionaire and the cleaning lady, bound by the strange grace of a ring on a dark carpet. He came to Sunday dinner sometimes, and Isaiah beat him at chess, and Nathaniel let him, and then stopped letting him, because the boy got good enough that he didn't have to. And an old man who had spent 3 years certain his life was over found, at 63, that it was not, that there was still a great deal of living to do, and a great deal of good, and that Maggie, wherever she was, would have liked Loretta Greene enormously, would have laughed her wonderful laugh at the whole impossible story of it. He kept the ring, of course. It went back into the safe, the last piece of Maggie. But it meant something more now than it had, because it had been gone, and a stranger with nothing had given it back. And so it was no longer only a piece of the woman he had lost. It was also proof, cold and bright and certain, of the thing Maggie had always believed and he had forgotten, and a cleaning lady had taught him again at 3 in the morning on a security screen. That the goodness in the world is real. That it lives most often in the people we have trained ourselves not to see. And that you never know, you truly never know, what one honest minute, done when you think no one is watching, is going to set in motion. I want to tell you something here at the end, the way I do. When I wrote this story, I kept thinking about how much of the world runs on people we have decided not to see. The ones who clean the offices and stock the shelves and empty the bins after we've gone home. And how we let ourselves believe the way Nathaniel Hayes believed. That desperate people will always do the desperate thing, that nobody gives back the diamond, that goodness is naive. And it simply is not true. The world is quietly full of Loretta Greenes, people holding the rope they desperately need and choosing, alone, with no one watching, to give it back because it isn't theirs. And we walk past them every single day, without learning their names. The miracle in this story is not the billionaire's money. Money is the easy part. The miracle is the honest minute on the 42nd floor. And the miracle is a man finally choosing to see the person he'd walked past for 9 years. One of those is rare. The other is available to every single one of us today, for free. So let me leave you with a question tonight. Whose name don't you know that you see all the time? The person who cleans your building, serves your coffee, rides your bus? Learn one name this week, just one. Say it out loud. You have no idea what a person is carrying, or what they gave back when no one was looking, or what it might mean to them simply to be seen. Tell me in the comments about someone the world walks past who deserves to be seen. I read them, and it always means more than you know. And one real thing before I go. This story is gentle, but the trouble in it is real, and it is happening tonight to people doing everything right. If you are facing the loss of your housing, or you are a grandparent or relative raising a child you did not expect to raise, please know that help exists and that needing it is not a failure. You can dial 211 from almost anywhere in the United States to reach a real person who can connect you to rent and eviction help, food, and family services in your area. And there are organizations dedicated specifically to supporting kinship caregivers, the grandmothers and aunts and uncles quietly raising the next generation. You are not invisible. You are not alone. And there is no shame in asking for the rope when it is honestly yours to take. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who has spent their life doing the right thing when no one was watching. Subscribe for a new story every week. And the next time you pass someone the world has decided not to see, remember Loretta Greene, and remember that you never know whose honest minute is holding the whole world up. Thank you for being here with me. I'll see you in the next one.